I'm trying to encourage people, inspire people to get to candor as well, and helping them make a choice about whether they want to amplify that in their lives through a rigorous investigation of how they're doing now, what the unintended consequences are of that, and the untapped opportunities, and what could be possible for them at work and lives, for their people, their teams, their families, all of it.
This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Gallagher, and I am excited about our guest today. Once we get into this conversation and you leave today, you're going to have many tips that are going to help you communicate better with your team, with your family, with your friends, and make a lot of those things happen. So I'm excited about that. I have TODD HOLZMAN with me, who has dedicated his career to helping individuals and organizations improve their communication and relationships. He's the CEO and founder of Holtzman Leadership, and his upcoming book, The Power of Candor, is set to revolutionize how we approach difficult conversations. So, Todd, I hope that was getting you teed up as well as I could and getting our conversation started. How are you doing today?
I am great. I'm great, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I won't give you any break getting started. I'll give you the same question I always ask my first-time guests on the Uncommon Leader podcast, and that's really to ask you to tell me a story from your childhood that still impacts who you are today as a person or as a leader. Now, we talked a little bit before the show about our age, so you got to go back a little ways here. I'm going to test your memory, but we won't reveal that completely, what we are, but let's just say we're mature.
Uh, yeah. So let's see. It's probably circa 1975, 76. And my dad had brought home a Sony Trinitron color, 19 inches. I mean, that was the big time for TVs back then. And, it was kind of like this prized possession of the family. My father was at work and my mom was in the kitchen doing whatever. And I saw this nail file. And I looked at the screen. And I looked at the nail file. For some reason, I thought, nail file and screen, why not? So I scraped it. And then I was just curious, and apparently very stupid. And I saw it scrape the screen. I was like, oh! I threw the nail file like a smoking gun away, ran to my room, and just started playing, to soothe myself. And then, father comes home later, I mean, many hours later, and comes to my room and would ask me, so, how's your day been? Oh, pretty good. Anything interesting happen? No, nothing I could think of. He goes, are you sure? And I start thinking, I hear that, I'm like, something's up. I don't know what it is. And then he goes, and it's close to Christmas. And he says, Santa doesn't like little boys that lie. And then I'm like, and then I have the flashback, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I saw the nail file. I saw the screen. I hit it. I didn't mean to do it. Da, 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 da. And I'm just crying. And, and he consoled me and he said, it's not what you did. It's that the important thing is for you to be honest about what you did. And that was kind of a very early childhood memory about the importance of honesty. And he really drilled that into me. Say what you think, stand up for yourself, don't lie, tell the truth. The problem is that it was, he was fine when I was doing that with other people. But when I was doing it with him, we didn't see things the same way. Didn't go so well. And my mom would often, she was more kind of emotionally reactive, would kind of react in a bad way. So I often felt, if I wasn't honest, I'd feel bad, right? Because my dad had kind of inculcated this into me. But then if I wasn't, things would go badly. And I didn't put like a term to it until probably 20 years later, which I called the honesty dilemma. And that has informed my life and my work ever since, because I think a lot of people feel that way every day. We all know. I mean, no parent would ever tell their kid, listen, the way to get ahead is try to like screw up the world and lie as much as you possibly can. Most parents, either explicitly or implicitly, are trying to teach their kids like try to do some good in the world and tell the truth. Um, but we all feel binds about that. Leaders, managers, salespeople, because if we make the truth the thing that we prioritize, we're hurt. It's going to damage relationships. But then if we're too concerned about damaging relationships, then often the truth conversations are where candor goes to die. And so yeah, that's the early childhood story. And since then, since 1994, I've dedicated my life to helping people solve this dilemma in their
God, I
lives.
love the connection. Love the connection to that story. Yeah, I remember. Again, I told you even before we got an episode, I got like four listeners total. Three of them are my mother, mother-in-law, and wife that listen to the show all the time. But I think about that, and I listen back as or have these videos back as a kid as I'm growing up as well. And I remember mom just saying, of all the things, just don't lie to me. Tell me the truth and keep it out there. So I
But
can
then again,
understand.
you'll probably hear if you have nothing nice to say, what
Don't
complete the
say it.
sentence.
Don't. And
So,
choose to
so
say
notice
nothing.
the mixed message. Tell
There's
this.
the dilemma, right?
That's the dilemma.
Tell me more about that honesty dilemma because it is a barrier, right, for us in improved communication. The other side is what I heard as well is that sometimes the truth hurts, and maybe there's overlap with those two things. But you mentioned the honesty dilemma.
Yeah, I mean, I was on a podcast yesterday actually where someone asked me kind of a similar question, but not so fine-tuned as that one. And I mean, so I think I explained it. It's like if you're not honest, bad things happen. And if you are honest, you're afraid bad things are going to happen,
Mm,
right? Um, and the question the guy asked me yesterday was, well, do you think that people avoid having, say, honest conversations because of the risks, right? That they think are embedded in having those conversations and the bad things that could result from them. And I said, yes, in part, but what people aren't really aware of all the bad things that are already happening because they're avoiding the truth of things in these conversations. Their relationships are already suboptimized. Their results are already suboptimized. They're already holding on to something which is bothering them. And so they're feeling frustrated and disappointed and demotivated and all of these kinds of things. And that's a big reason why people avoid having honest conversations because it's because if they were aware of all the problems the avoidance of honesty was creating, or is it were creating? English is my first language, but sometimes grammar escapes me.
sure.
Um, they would be much less likely to avoid them. And then, of course, there's, the competence to ensure those conversations go well.
We got a mentor that has said this to me before, and it's one I've read from. I've not met him before in person, but it's from reading his stuff. It said the most expensive time is the time between when you know you need to have that conversation and when you actually carry that conversation out in an effective way. And that all that time in between there is such an emotional barrier that exists inside of that. But also, if it's a piece of feedback that you need somebody to improve and you're just afraid to tell them, you're losing all that productivity, you're losing all that profitability, whatever it is, and effectiveness that you're losing as well. But that becomes the most expensive time. I remember I had the one of the most
Don,
profound.
who said that, by the way? That's
Oh,
brilliant.
that's a John Maxwell quote. I mean, that I read inside of his book, and I can't remember which one it was because unfortunately,
That's
that
that's a
entire row
that's
it's
great.
out there. But it is. I mean,
Great.
it's so true, right? The I had a conversation. And I say this. I had an employee when I first got into leadership back in 1998 that I wanted to have a tough conversation with, and I just didn't know how to have it. And I finally learned a framework to have that conversation after going to a week-long leadership event. And if this is all that I got out of that event, it was powerful. I was ready to terminate this individual because he couldn't get along with other people. His behaviors were bad, and I couldn't figure out a way to tell him. I just wanted to be nice because I didn't want the guy to be mad at me. He was the same age as me. We came from the same class and all those things. But I ended up being able with that framework to have that tough conversation with him. And he literally said, that has got to be the best feedback I've ever gotten. That's 1998. That individual is still with that same company now
Right.
as an executive director for the organization. And I was getting ready to push him out the door.
So I remember got a few things I want to say. Sometimes you just got to pick one, John. Football. I mean, good for you. Um, you know, allowing the truth to be your ally and having some faith that the best that could possibly happen will be as a result of prioritizing the truth and good for you for having faith in this person as well, that they could hear it. We often give each other way too little credit. And we attribute too much weakness to each other, and it's actually warranted as a general rule. But what it reminds me of, and when I can mention clients, I can. When I can't, I can't. We're working at my team and I were working at Red Bull years ago, consulting them. We're in this beautiful ski lodge in Park City, Utah, called Stein Erickson's, and we ran these things called bull shops. We had to brand it properly for what they were doing. We'd have like
Sure.
3.5 days in the mountains. It was ridiculously luxurious and privileged to be able to even do that. And we had a bunch of I guess it was the GMs or something around the table running different geographies. And one of the GMs is ready, just like you, ready to get rid of this guy. And they're all agreeing with him. I was like, okay, so if I understand it, this is what you think his gap is, X. Is that right? Uh-huh. And this is what your data for this is. Here's your examples. Y. That's right. Yeah. And this is all the problems that his behavior is creating. Z. Yes. So have you told him all this? No. So you're ready to fire a guy because he's not behaving these ways. He's behaving in this way, which I can understand, right? Because it is creating problems for sure. But you never actually told him the truth about these things. And you're blaming him for being unchangeable and resistant to change. I mean, you actually can't make that claim unless you've actually given him the feedback.
That's
So
right.
what you're doing is, listen, it may be the case that the horse has already left the barn and it's too late to recover the situation. But I think you do have to question the morality of your decision in light of this. And it's interesting. It's funny, I was angry about it. I remember I was a good bit younger then, and this is like 15 years ago. So,
Mhm.
but they agreed, and he had the conversation, and the person was open to it, and he turned his behavior around, his performance improved, and they didn't fire him.
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, look at how much chaos could have been avoided had
Mhm.
they had the conversation earlier, and had they not. Look how coincidental it all was. This girl's whole life was in the balance, and had these guys not come to Utah and had that conversation not occurred, all these bad things would have happened. And then, of course, these guys never would have learned anything either, the leaders themselves. And this is why, will I script your next question, or can I just say a little more about this candor thing?
Todd, go ahead. Come on.
So, okay, because I know we talked a little bit before, and you spent a lot of time in healthcare and consulting to kind of healthcare entities. And we have too. We spent a lot of time with several global faculty of 13 people, more than half of whom are overseas, and the rest are here stateside. And so we have been, I will say, lucky enough to not only train leaders at very high levels, like senior levels, like CEOs of pharmas and things like this, but also customer-facing teams, salespeople, MSLs, patient access people, all the like. And we have had a kind of privileged access to the way they actually conduct these conversations with customers. And when we develop people, we ask them, bring to us a customer conversation that didn't produce the result that you wanted. And based upon the work of one of my idols, Chris Ardress from Harvard. So Chris taught at the business school, the law school, the graduate school of education where I studied, the Kennedy School of Government where I taught. For those of you who are interested in him, imagine I was going to say the Einstein of the social sciences, Argyris, Chris. Wrote a bunch of stuff in the Harvard Business Review. I don't know. He wrote, I don't know, a few hundred articles, 30 books, received 14 honorary doctorates for his massive contributions to management, leadership, organizational behavior, research, education, anthropology. I mean, amazing human being. And he developed a foolproof tool that we use that helps you. It's the best next thing to like miking people up or filming them when they're actually having real conversation. So the point of me telling you this is we get very accurate data on how they're really behaving during these critical conversations with customers. Fine. The reason I'm explaining all this is that in every single instance, the culprit was a candor gap. That they were either not expressing important things they were thinking and feeling to the customer, and or asking the kind of questions that were necessary so that the customer would open up and share the truth of what they were thinking with them. That's number one. And number two, by the way, largely unaware that that was the reason why the conversations weren't having the impact that they wanted. I'm not saying completely unaware, just for the most part unaware. They would mostly say the explanation was largely external. They're not giving me the time I need. They're very busy. They prefer the other therapy. Insert explanation. I wouldn't call them excuses. I think those things are also true. But here's what the consequences are. And this is why I was just writing a post on this today, have made candor the cause of my life, is because the human toll is huge. And the level of human suffering is incredibly underappreciated. So we'll talk about three levels of suffering: for the customer, for the salespeople in this case themselves, and for the patient. So the customer, maybe this is a healthcare, HCP or somebody like this, feels like the conversation has been a waste of their time and they're not getting any value out of it. Because if you're not saying anything valuable, if it's provocative, why would it be interesting and useful to them? Fine. And so, of course, then if you're a sales rep, your access to them goes down because they don't spend time on things they don't consider valuable. As the sales rep, you're miserable, right? At least with some set of customers, you're feeling very frustrated, you're disappointed, you're demotivated, you're deflated, all of it. And getting up out of bed day in, day out, man, talking to these customers when they want to give you a few minutes, I mean, I couldn't do it. But then you start to think about the patients. Well, the consequences of this is that in these instances, the patient ain't getting the medicine they need.
Oh, that's right.
All right. And some of these patients, the best case scenario is there's an opportunity to improve a patient's life, and it's being squandered or delayed. The middle case is they're suffering from some horrible disease. They eventually get the medicine, but they suffer longer than necessary. The worst case scenario is they actually die. And when we've had...
Back to that time gap, by the way, too. Back to
That's
that
right,
time.
buddy.
How long it takes them to get the information they need. Yep.
It's you're saying that partially triggered for me to say this. And so, and by the way, this is not my analysis. It is our analysis, but it's their analysis. So when we take them through a process of taking a hard look at their case studies, we ask them, so what is it that you did or didn't do that's preventing you from making progress? After we help them understand what good looks like so they can better analyze themselves. And then it'd be pretty insightful. Then we say, what are the unintended negative consequences on customers, you, and patients? What I'm telling you is what they said. And so you know how this work can be, John, is you have a sense of mission about it, but you keep getting re-enrolled in it because your clients teach you things that make the difficult work of helping people get better at this stuff worthwhile.
Well, Todd, look, I mean, I love the passion that you have for making that happen in the world of healthcare. It exists, again, in that consulting space that I've been in as well. How many times, frankly, a physician, and I'm not taking shots at physicians, they got tough jobs, but in a 3 minute conversation they have with a patient, how much time do they have to use candor with a patient that say, if you don't change your behavior, you are going to die at some point in time, because we're all going to die. But they don't want to have those conversations. They don't want the patient to be upset with them. And I make up that that's one of the biggest barriers to candor, is the desire, whether it's a leader, as a family member, as a physician, whatever that is, to be liked. And we don't want someone to be upset with us. And so I have two questions. The
That's great.
candor piece of it, let's even go down to the basics of that. How do you define candor in communication? And then the second piece of that is, what attributes are needed to be effective in that delivery? Because I could also communicate with candor, but do it by yelling at someone or whatever that is. So, how do you define it, and then what are the attributes needed to be effective at it?
Okay, let me address the first question. If I lose the thread in the second question, just please bring it
Yep.
back.
Yep. Yep.
So maybe I could say what it isn't first. So it isn't about saying everything you think and feel. My partner Olga, who has a reality show sitcom that's on now on Apple TV. Okay, shameless plug, called Olga Knows Best. Um, and unfortunately, I'm in it because it's about her life, so I have no choice.
Mm.
She would love that, right? Let me teach all of our clients just be fully self-expressed, say whatever you think and feel. Great for a reality show, man, but not great for real life. And actually, a managing director of talent at one of our FTSE 100 banking clients told us, yeah, we tried something like that. We instituted a value years ago before we ever came along, called something like straight talk or whatever it was, or direct conversations. And she said, it gave license to every sociopath to say what they thought and felt, regardless of how unkind it was. So what we like to say, and I like to say, like, candor without compassion can be cruel.
Mm.
It's equally, okay, it's equally not about only you saying what you think and feel. Because none of us as individuals are omniscient. And so a piece of truth, hopefully, or some aspect of reality exists in my head. But we've all got pieces of the puzzle, and we have to combine these puzzle pieces to form a more complete picture of what's actually true. And I was talking to the definition I'm going to give you. I have shamelessly stolen it, but it came from one of our clients. So Ed Jenkins, hi Ed, British guy. I think he still lives in the UK. I think he might be working for AstraZeneca now. I'm not sure, but he was working for a different pharma when we worked together. And we'd gone through this. He had gone through this program. He was the franchise head for an important therapy for the United Kingdom. And I think up reporting into him, he had kind of commercial leaders and salespeople, and he had medical leaders and salespeople. So he and all these different levels went through our kind of candor program. And it delivered a great result. Despite the company going through a big reorg, despite them losing their with the FDA, they didn't get the approval for the earlier line of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
People kept using what they learned, and they grew orders, which was amazing. And I didn't think would happen, because if you're in the middle of reorg and then you don't get approved for early line of therapy, and then your competitor does, then all the HCPs are looking at the competitor's drug and say, why are you going to buy anything from you? Okay. So I asked Ed, amongst others, can you help me understand why the program delivered? And it seemed like it delivered a result. Well, first of all, do you think it did? Okay. And if so, what actually happened? I mean, I have some sense of why it happens, but I don't, we're not there watching people, what they're doing with it. They're not inside of people's heads. So I don't know 100% what they're actually doing. And this is the definition of candor that now is kind of our North Star as a firm. And he said, I always thought of these conversations as either something to win or to avoid. Because now I understand that candor is treating every conversation as a collaborative search for the truth in order to make things better. And I have to say, John, that really hit me. It was 2 years ago, I guess, maybe 2.5. And it's like, wow, somebody finally explained to me what the heck I've been doing.
Hmm.
And I was very grateful for it. And so that's how we think of it. And I think this is why this is a mind shift for people. Um, because in some ways, the conversations seem tougher for people because of how they're thinking about the conversation. Like, oh, I've got to convince them they're wrong and I'm right. But if you think of it as this conversation is meant to do some good in the world, maybe it's also a way I'm trying to serve this person as well. So you're trying to serve something outside of yourself. This person, the team, the impact this team has on important things and people, then it kind of shifts your orientation. So then if you start to think of, okay, I'm trying to do some good through the conversation, but I have to treat it as a collaborative search for the truth. And I have to have kind of courageous humility. This is a variable, that one of the variables you were talking about, or aspects of it. It's like, okay, I have the courage to express the truth of what I think, but I have to have the humility to be open to and to even invite people to tell me where I'm wrong. Because what I care about is not being right. I care about what's true. So then a lot of you who are listening and thinking about having tough conversations doesn't mean it makes the conversation easy. By no means. You are right to be worried about these things. It's not in your head. You don't need some psychotropics to help you deal with your anxiety. Most of the time, your limbic system is telling you something, probably for most often for some good reasons. But if you think of it, if you kind of orient yourself that way, the truth on behalf of service, then I think it totally affects the way you approach it. Then you can say to somebody, listen, I'm worried some of the things that you're doing are kind of damaging your credibility with the team, which I know is important to you, and may impact your ability to kind of, get the kind of bonus you're looking at the end of the year. And I've been thinking about that, and I got some things to share with you that I think could be helpful. You interested in talking about it? I don't see why it's not that conversation won't be upsetting, but it doesn't mean the person will be upset with you. They'll be upset with the reality of the situation.
Right.
So anyways, that's
oftentimes. So I love that. I mean, what I'm hearing you saying, the attributes that need to be there, courage and humility are the kind of entry. If you get into the conversation, you've got to have both those things. Ultimately, overcoming what Mark Twain would say is that we can make up a lot of bad things that are about to happen, 90% of them of which will never occur, in terms of the quote that he has. But there still may be a bad response to it. But the piece that comes after that is even that specific behavioral observation that goes along with it. So I have courage, I have humility, but I better have specifics to be able to communicate with the individual. Back to your point, not to be right necessarily, but so that they can take an action from it and do something different.
Well, let's use your framework, right? You were telling me a little bit about this before. What was this framework? You had
situation, behavior, impact, and action. What do I need you to do going forward? Yep.
Fine. So let's take the first three, because if you dump the A is certainly important in that framework. If you introduce the A too soon, then what happens to leaders? This is one of the big traps that we see in the data set of like 50,000 conversations that we've studied. People jump to action too quickly before they have agreement on the problem. Right. So you're trying to get agreement on the SIB, right? First, situation, impact, and behavioral examples. Is that right? Did I get that right? Okay, fine. So I think that's a wonderful framework. You can see in that example that I was giving, all I did was put a frame around it.
That's right.
Right? It's like I'm expressing my intent of sharing all this stuff with you. And this is sometimes when converse without the frame, if you throw it, I'm not saying this is always true, but sometimes it'll be true. If you go, I got some feedback for you. Here's the situation. Here's the impact. Here's the behavioral examples. Great. If you don't put the frame around it, I want to talk to you about something,
Yes. Right.
that I think is, and sometimes you can name the impact that is having potentially this impact on you and things that you and we care about, then they could easily attribute to you're just trying to give them a hard time.
Right.
And when you're receiving an un oftentimes when we're talking to each other, any conversations that are worth their salt are probably going to be emotional to some degree. They're going to be provocative. They might be upsetting because if we disagree with each other, well, that's what we can do over a beer, right? But if I'm talking about something important, that probably I'm not sure if this is right, but let me say it out loud and see what you think. I'm probably talking to you because I don't think you're either taking action on something properly, or I don't think you're aware of something that you need to be
Sure.
aware of, or I don't think maybe you are aware of it, but you aren't taking it seriously enough. So,
I
so
think you're spot on. I often refer to some of those conversations. If you're not getting a little blood on the carpet, it's probably not really worth the conversation. I mean, and to your point, that happens. I mean, fights happen. To your
right?
point, drinking it right. You throw a beer mug at the other person, kind of thing. That's proverbial. I mean, don't
So
do that.
I'm
But yeah,
fine for conversations
yeah,
where we're shooting the shit,
yeah.
and that's fun, right? Or we're in the UK just recreational win. But if I'm talking to you about something that matters to me, it means by definition, I don't think it's mattering enough to you. I don't think you're dealing with it
Yep.
properly, or I don't even think you're seeing it. So embedded in these important conversations is going to be conflict. By definition. Now, because of that, because the conversation will almost always generate some discomfort for people, when people feel uncomfortable, they're more likely to make negative attributions about your motives and about what your intent of having the conversation is. So if you do some good framing, it kind of
Mhm.
cleans that up, provided they believe you. But also, and this is what Chris Voss talks about from the Black Swan Group, it gives people a moment to kind of brace themselves and get ready for it so they don't get hijacked by their limbic systems. So this is why I make it's not the only thing we talk about, it's certainly not, but why I make a big um, point around framing before you dive into the kind of SIBO model,
It's so funny
which is
that
excellent, by the way.
and I love the context you've shared in terms of the action coming in too early. So I had a conversation just a couple of days ago with a coaching client who was going to have a tough conversation. I said, "How are you going to start this conversation? Take me through how you're going to start it." So I'm going to
Good.
ask as soon as I walk in, I'm going to ask them, "Are they in or not?" I'm like, "Stop." That's the action portion of this. Let's get to this. To your point, let's put a frame around this conversation before you bring them to are you in or not kind of thing. Because that's the action you want. You want some different behavior. You go in that aggressive and you are going to have a fight on your hands because they're going to go, into defense mode. All these things are going to happen. Whatever's coming out is an attack on me
That's
and or
right.
my wording. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, you gotta earn the right to say that.
Yes, exactly right.
These conversations, there is a temperature at which the ingredients need to be baked before they cohere. And we were talking a little bit before, and if you don't want to talk about this, fine. Like, is this the example where this person's worried about them blowing up?
No, yeah, absolutely. They're
Yeah,
worried again.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so here's what's really so let's look at that for a second, right? The person's concerned that the person they're going to give this feedback to is going to blow up. So then they do something which ensures they will blow up.
Yep.
So what's really interesting is, why is that? Because I would bet that at some level he knows better. The reason I say that is I'll make two bets with you. One which we will not be able to validate. One, if somebody else were going to do the same thing and came to him for coaching or her, he'd probably say, "Don't do that." So it means he has a rules in his head that says doing that is a violation of some rule,
Mm.
right? Like, don't jump to action before we actually discuss the problem rule. And most people have that in their head. But I also, my other bet, which we could validate, is I bet you would have told him that. He probably got it pretty quickly. Is that true? You
Oh, I
kind of
think so. Absolutely.
said.
I mean, again, if we go back through that conversation, he's going to say that makes sense, that I
Right.
shouldn't do it.
So,
Yeah.
so, so what, when it's that quick, it means he a priori, before he ever heard from you, had a rule in his head that said not to do something like that. So then the question becomes, so if all that's true, then why does he violate his own rule? And because the reason I'm bringing this up is because what we have found. So this guy Chris Ardress, upon whose extraordinary research, not everything, but much of what we do is based. So what Chris, I'll give a very layman's explanation of it. Discovered is that we've got our principles and we got our programming, and the two are often in contradiction to each other. So people believe in um, I should have the courage to express what I think. I should be deeply curious about what other people think. I should also see these conversations as collaborations where we're trying to make sense out of reality together and on that basis trying to figure out what to do about it. Right. So we
Hmm.
see, believe these things. What Chris discovered when he first did this research in the 70s with 15,000 people, we've now since worked with about 50,000, is that when people have any kind of concern about that there's going to be a conflict, that the conversation might be upsetting, that it might be threatening and or embarrassing, anything like this, that these principles get short-circuited and get replaced with programming that drives people to keep things too comfortable, that makes them want to win and not makes them too competitive, win and not lose the conversation,
Mm.
and be super controlling in the conversation. And a clinical psychologist that I'm fond of, a guy named Jordan Peterson, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard of, says that our principles are stored in a different part of our brain than is our programming.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we can read these great books, watch YouTube videos, even listen to us talk, and that will hopefully improve the warehouse of information in our brains that stores our principles. But the programming, when we feel that the conversation may be threatening and or embarrassing for myself and or other people, gets activated and blocks it. And this is why the leadership development industry, at least I would assert, it's a $60 billion industry worldwide. Research has been done on whether it changes leadership behavior. Not so much. It's not because we're teaching people the wrong things or we're trying to develop them the wrong things. There may be problems there too, and I think there are. But let's assume everything we taught them was perfect. And if only they could apply it, they would be better leaders. The problem is the application, because the overprotective program is what we've coined it, blocks people from doing this.
Sure.
You have to help people become aware of, so why is it they violate their own principles? And in your guy's case, so let's assume he has the rule not to do that. Why does he do it nevertheless? What do you think?
Well, I think it's comfort. I think moving back into a space of comfort. If someone distracts or moves you off of your point, you're going to have a tendency to go back to your natural programming
So that's
versus
his
staying on the
comfort zone.
principles. Yeah.
What he's doing is a much more. I got to know right now, you in or out?
Hmm.
No effing about, right? So that's his comfort zone. But it sounds to me like he's trying to exert a lot of control over the conversation, because his theory is, I'm worried about this person blowing up. So if I can kind of establish some dominance and
Early
exert some
on.
in or out, then I can contain the upset. It probably is.
You might be right, Todd. You might
Playing out.
absolutely. I don't want to rule that out either. To your point,
By the way,
and
these
that
things often team up. It's like
sure.
a hybrid of comfort and control.
Yeah, you use the
So
term emotional. I mean, that's one of the things that I really get with them as well. It's like, how do you convey emotion without being emotional is very important. How do you show them you're passionate, that you care so much without flying off the handle? And I often encourage them to role
very
play
good.
those conversations with others as
Great.
well before you go in. Just and then to have them fly off the handle in the role playing and see how you handle it so you can be ready for it just in case it happens. I'll never forget. It was a training probably 20 years ago when I was actually on the other side in manufacturing. We were training some of our leaders utilizing this framework that I've talked about. And one of the role players absolutely came unhinged in the role playing conversation against one of the top leaders that we had in the organization. And I mean, the whole class was like, totally taken aback just in terms of how he went after that. And he was a big guy anyway, like Brutus from Popeye. It was so funny, and it was to me. I didn't know he was going to do it, so even I was a little bit uncomfortable when he went there. But then I started to laugh and realizing that we were just role playing. But I got to tell you, when you can predict and overcome some of those things beforehand, that can be pretty powerful.
And I will say,
Todd, you
John,
got to go ahead.
I'll just say, I will
Yeah.
say, you know, like, thank goodness this guy we're talking about has you, because I mean, you guided him in the right direction, and now he's going to be in a much better position to have the kind of conversations that he needs to have that will be, of service to this person and the company that he works for. So keep going. I'm sorry, I
No,
interrupted you. I
I
just
think I think it's
wanted to point that out.
I look forward to hearing about it. It was actually a conversation was supposed to happen today as we record this. It's going to have me
Okay.
following up with him just with a phone call or a text message and say how to
Say a
go.
little prayer
Because I
here.
am, yeah, exactly. Well, that was the other side of it. As I told him, by the way, regardless of where you sit on that journey, I said I am a man of faith. I'm going to put it on my calendar to the time you're going to meet with him, and I am going to say a little prayer. And I would encourage you to do the same thing before you go in to give you the courage and the humility you need. Holy Spirit, fill you up with the courage and humility you need to have this conversation that needs to be had. Absolutely. Todd,
Great.
you got your book coming up, The Power of Candor. And I know publishers well enough, they may try and change that name on it, change the name on you, but
That's
give me a
fine.
sneak peek. Who are you writing this book for? And what do you want folks to take away from it?
So thank you for asking. I guess this is time for a shameless plug.
Yeah.
Um, the alternative title could be, since we're getting a little biblical here, uh, "The Truth Shall Set You Free." And that conviction is embedded certainly into our work. And my firm, we have people who are all over the map in terms of their religious affiliations or the lack thereof. But this underlying principle is something that we all believe. And so the reason I'm writing the book is two reasons. Well, let me say the larger objective of the book is to provide people with knowledge they can use in real life to improve their important conversations in and outside of work
Hmm.
so that we can reduce human suffering and increase human joy and meaning. So that's what's driving it. Then the question is, I would ask, and I've asked myself this question, why another book on conversations? Haven't we had enough? I mean, there's so many of them. And I think the reason is twofold. Um, there's not, I don't know how to express this exactly. Let me say it this way. I think there is a knowledge gap as to what good looks like when it comes to having these important conversations in our lives. And so I mean to close that through the book by sharing the results of our work and research
Mm.
for over 30 years with easily 50,000 people at this point. Um, because the field, there's some good ideas in these books. There are some gaps in the research, and there are some downright bad ideas that are passed off as good practice. And so, to the degree that I can, in the context of this book, I want to provide people with quality information about how to have good conversations.
Love that.
Secondly,
Love that premise. No doubt about it in terms of providing good data
yeah,
on, how it works. Absolutely.
nobody's geeked out more about on this subject than we have in terms of the research. There are other people who have done great research on other topics, but we have, and I have been obsessed with only one thing, and this has been the one thing for now
Mm.
30 years. Um, so I better have something good to say. Otherwise, I've been wasting 3 decades. You know, the second thing is I don't want people to be naive about the challenge. Let me say, the other thing is I'm trying to encourage people, inspire people to get to candor as well,
Hmm.
and helping them make a choice about whether they want to amplify that in their lives through a rigorous investigation of how they're doing now, what the unintended consequences are of that, and the untapped opportunities, and what could be possible for them at work and their lives, for their people, their teams, their families, all of it, if they could, turn the volume up on candor in the way we defined it, right? Collaborative search for truth in order to make things better. But I also want to do something within the confines of the book that actually can make people better at this. So they don't have to spend, you know, or spend less money on expensive training. But what I want to do with that though is parlay it into, or I'd rather connect it to the app, because we are in the development of an app. Because the problem is that what people who get access to my firm or Kim Scott's firm, whoever it is, right? What is it? Top 1% of the world, maybe,
Right.
right?
Maybe.
I mean, what? Those are the only people who struggle with conversations and need to be better at it. So, but the thing is it's like it's way too expensive and it's not doable. So, because I've been studying this phenomenon enough, uh, we have a pretty good sense of what the algorithms are that underpin effective practice, and also what the current algorithms are that are making people less effective at these conversations. And we figured out how to disrupt, short circuit the current algorithm and
Mm.
replace it with a more effective algorithm. This is the benefit of not having written anything yet and just being in the lab and developing people for now 30 years. So the idea is bring any conversation you want to have with anyone about anything important anytime. She's here for you. And she will not only help you strategize for what to talk about and how to talk about it, but this is the kicker. The quality of the practice that you will get. She will simulate the conversation you're going to have with the person. She will both play the person you're going to be, and then she will give you in the moment feedback about how you're conducting it.
Mm.
So if you're falling
Fantastic.
into a trap, she'll be like, John, you're jumping to action. You're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you're actually offering solutions to a problem that you haven't even discussed yet and that haven't actually been agreed. Do you see that? You're like, yeah. Okay. So name the problem. Okay. And then she'll guide you through that so that you can start disrupting the old pattern and start etching and
Mm.
rewiring a new pattern. And then the more you do it, it doesn't matter what it could be, feedback to your team. It could be trying to influence up. It could be leading across boundaries with people you don't have authority. It could be a conversation with a customer. It could be conversations at home, whatever, outside of work, which are vast. you know, practice, 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 and you just become tons better. But it also is very practical application of it's going to help you solve a problem that you have right now.
I
So
think it's
that's
such a great application for what we need in leadership today, utilizing AI, utilizing the app to help us have those conversations. I know I've benefited from it myself in terms of having those conversations prior to that and looking for
like more
tips.
people need access to John, right?
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
saying, but you can't do it. You're limited because you're one human being. But if you could take
You're spot on.
algorithms in your
I
head,
love the scale
that's
activity. I
the
love
idea.
that. I believe the word that I read the democratization of the tool, if you will.
That's what
So
I'm
the
doing.
book will come a long way, but the actual app itself and making that available is going to be something powerful. I have loved our conversation. I think we should get back online once you get your book coming out as well and the app gets tightened up and talk even more about this topic because I know I could talk about it for hours, but I also want to honor your time and my time as well. And Todd, how can folks get in touch with you to learn more about Candor, to learn more about you, and be ready for when your book's coming out?
Sure. And also, if they want some free resources as
Sure.
well. So people can contact me directly, Todd, TODD, at holzman.com. So HOLZMAN.com. I have a PA. Her name is Lace, LACE, same email address. They should also hook up with us on LinkedIn because my faculty and I are posting on a daily basis. So we're trying to provide valuable content.
Hmm.
And then we're also, I mean, there's like, I don't know, hundreds of stuff on our blogs. video and written. So just go to holzmanleadership.com or holzman.com. It takes you to the same place. And right-hand side of the screen, click, and you'll see all kinds of stuff that you can learn from right now.
Excellent. I'll be sure to put the links in the show notes as well so folks can get to those easily. They can hear them. They'll show up in the YouTube
Thanks.
comments as well. Todd, I'll finish you up with the same question. I'll give you the last word. Again, one of those questions that I always have for my first time guests, but I'm going to give you a billboard and you can put it anywhere you want to, right behind you, somewhere there in New York City, behind your shoulder or wherever you want to put it. You can put any message you want to on that billboard. What's the message that you put on there, and why do you put that message on there?
Tell the truth, do good.
I think that's a pretty good message. Tells
Also,
a lot about what we're talking about with candor. Again, you mentioned too the ability to do this outside of work. Like I can't wait to go and use some of this stuff as I walk out the door to my office, having conversations with my son and
thank
others to help me go forward. So I have
you.
really enjoyed our conversation. I appreciate you investing the time with the leaders of the Uncommon Leader podcast. Wish you the best in your work, in your book, and all the things you're doing to try and make an impact in this area. Thanks, Todd.
My pleasure. You're welcome. Thank you.